Welcome everyone to Talk with the Doc with Dr. Leichliter. Thank you as always. I know there were a few questions emailed prior, so we'll start with those, and then you can ask your questions by putting them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question, but we'll all stay muted during the talk.
I was going to say, I feel like that's just asking for trouble.
Yeah.
Type it into the chat box.
Type it into the chat. That's going to be
our best bet.
Okay. Well, thanks again. And we'll hand it over to the doc.
Thanks, Casey. Welcome to the party, everybody. Sorry I had to move it earlier. I do have another talk that I have to go give. That's why I had to speed up the process a little bit here. A couple things that I always start with. So again, Casey's right. If you do have questions, I have a couple that I got emailed, but type them into the chat box. I'll get to those afterwards. Couple of things that I always start with, which are fairly straightforward and simple. And if you've been coming to these, you know, if you're new, welcome to the party. I am Dr. Leichliter. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a movement disorder specialist over at Allegheny General or Allegheny Health Network. I specialize in Parkinson's disease. This is a good place to ask general questions, general ideas, general thoughts. If you have a concern, a question about anything Parkinson's disease related, throw it into the chat box. This is not a great venue to give specific medical advice, right? So this isn't a great choice to say, hey, I'm on this, this, and this. What do you think I should do next? That's a great question for your doctor, which you should have. And if your doctor is me, then send me a message on our other outlet and we'll figure out what to do. But having open communication with your doctor is key to success. The other thing I like to tell people is everything on here is my opinion. Even though we all think that, in neurology and medicine, particularly in movement disorders, we try to understand, or we try to give you the best advice we can based on medical knowledge or fact or evidence-based, which is words we always like to throw out, but that's not always available. And so everything you hear is my opinion. If you go see another neurologist, if you go see another movement disorder specialist, if you see somebody else, they may have a different opinion. Generally, again, I like to think that what I'm telling you is based on the best information available, but sometimes I do make stuff up. And I usually throw up some quotation marks when I make stuff up and I tell you, hey, I'm making this up. So I don't try to hide that. Without further ado, let me get to some of the questions, and then I will get to anything you guys type in the chat box, and we'll go from there. So actually, the first question I got was whether or not I'm participating in the Strive project. So I'm not. So I had to actually look it up to figure out what that was. And that's a combination of a couple of things. So one is it's the deep brain stimulator with the recording ability or the measuring ability in conjunction with a wearable device, it looks like, and basically an app on the phone that kind of puts all this stuff together, which I think is really interesting idea. And if you were, I don't remember if it was last time or the time before, but probably from here on out, I'm going to talk about a technology, because again, that's becoming such a much bigger use in medicine. You're going to see it. I mean, look at what we're doing now. It's all based on technology. But you're going to see technology used more and more in medicine, in neurology, and in Parkinson's disease. And I think the application or the use of wearable devices, recording devices, deep brain stimulators that can not only record or potentially adjust, self-adjust, these are all things in the future. And I think you're going to see more and more of it. So I am interested to see any of these studies, any of these trials, any of these applications where they're using technology, because I really do think that technology it's not going anywhere. And none of us really like change. None of us really like using technology. I'm not that fond of it myself per se, but it's going to be there. We're going to have to deal with it. We're going to have to learn how to use it. We're going to have to use it to our advantage. From your guys' standpoint, it's really going to be kind of wearable devices, more video conferencing with doctors or specialists or therapists or exercise classes. From my standpoint, it's basically how am I going to contain all of the information that's going to come in, because that's a lot of data that comes in if you just wear something for a week, or any programmable things from implanted stimulators or things. It's just going to generate a lot of data. And so again, not to get too far off topic, no, I'm not participating in any of those trials at the moment, or those applications at the moment, but I am interested to see how technology kind of plays a bigger role as we move forward in the treatment of this disease. One question that I get constantly or all the time is, and this again, and I've talked about this before, but it warrants going over again, because again, if there are new people, you've never heard it, and even the people that I've explained it to, it doesn't always sink in, and it really is, what's the difference between Parkinson's disease and Parkinsonism, or what is the definition of Parkinsonism? Because if you're my patient, you'll hear me use the words, and it sounds like I'm using them interchangeably, although I'm not. Or if you go to other neurologists, they may use them interchangeably. And it does get confusing when you read your notes, because everybody has access to their health records these days, for better or for worse. And so that does give you a lot of information that you might not quite understand. And so it's never a bad idea or a bad time to kind of go over this again, because it does get complicated and it is a little bit important to understand. So Parkinsonism is the symptoms. So anybody who has tremors, stiffness, slowness of movement, balance problems, these are the cardinal features of Parkinsonism. And so anybody who has those symptoms from any cause of any type has Parkinsonism. Idiopathic Parkinsonism, meaning Parkinsonism not caused by anything else, is generally thought of as Parkinson's disease. And so Parkinson's disease is a subset of Parkinsonism that doesn't have a cause, has a typical age of onset, progression, response to medications. Everything happens fairly predictably and typically. If you're in that category, so if you show up in the office with Parkinsonism, meaning the symptoms of Parkinsonism, and everything seems to be fairly typical and straightforward, then I say I think you have Parkinson's disease. If anything is out of the ordinary, either there's a cause, meaning you have vascular disease, and I think that's what's causing your symptoms, or there's a medication that's triggering your symptoms, or if anything's just atypical, meaning you're awfully young or awfully old. Not that it can't be Parkinson's disease, it's just atypical, or you progress quicker than I would expect, or your symptoms are a little bit atypical. Or you have other kind of defining symptoms, then I wouldn't call you Parkinson's disease. I would either call you atypical Parkinsonism, or if there was a more specific diagnosis, I would use that. For instance, there are some Parkinson's plus conditions, i.e. progressive supranuclear palsy, multiple systems atrophy, cortical basal syndrome, diffuse Lewy body disease. These are all Parkinsonisms and not Parkinson's disease. And they all have specific telltale signs or symptoms or findings that kind of point me in those directions. Now, not everybody falls into any of these categories nicely, and you end up getting just called Parkinsonism forever. And that's okay too. But that's what you'll see, or that's kind of the distinction between the terms. Again, Parkinsonism is really the umbrella term that covers everybody that has the symptoms, and Parkinson's disease is really anybody who has those symptoms that has typical disease, no cause, so on and so forth. One isn't necessarily better than another, although generally Parkinson's disease responds better to medicines. It has more of a typical course. I'm much better at kind of predicting what's going to happen if you have typical Parkinson's disease than if you have Parkinsonism or anything atypical. But realistically, the terms are really just there to describe what we're seeing, what we think is going on or is causing the underlying problem, and to help us figure out what to do. But again, that's always worth going over, because you will hear these terms. You'll hear Parkinson's disease, you'll hear Parkinsonism, you'll hear atypical Parkinsonism, you'll hear Parkinson's plus. And it does, not that you have to know all the details and all the ins and outs about all of these things, but if you have a general understanding of the distinctions between them, I think it'll help. But that's always a good question. So I always think it's worth talking about. And then the last question that was emailed to me is very similar to the first question that was typed in here, which is about orthostatic hypotension. And orthostatic hypotension, just to kind of give you an overview, is blood pressure dropping. And so what that means is, in neurological problems and cardiac problems and other problems, the mechanisms for blood pressure don't work correctly. So when I talk about blood pressure, generally there's something that normal, and I always put normal in quotation marks because I don't know anybody that's normal, but non-Parkinson's disease patients or non-neurological patients, when they go from sitting to standing, their blood pressure goes up a little bit or at least stays the same. You know, when you stand up, all the blood rushes to your legs. And if the blood rushes to your legs, it's not getting up to your brain. Your brain really likes to have oxygen. Otherwise, it doesn't really make you feel very good. You get lightheaded and potentially even pass out. Again, you have mechanisms built into your cardiovascular system to prevent that from happening. So when you stand up, your blood pressure maybe goes up a little bit or your heart rate goes up a little bit to make sure you're pumping blood up to your brain and not just down into your legs to make it so you don't feel lightheaded and pass out. When those mechanisms or those receptors that are usually kind of here in the carotid arteries or in various other locations, when they don't work very well or correctly, what ends up happening is you stand up, the blood rushes to your legs or pulls in your legs. Your body does not compensate for that or correct for that. And then you don't end up pumping enough blood up to your brain. You get lightheaded and potentially you pass out. And what we see in blood pressure readings is when you stand up, instead of your blood pressure staying the same or maybe going up a little bit, it actually goes down. And so you'll see, we see drops of blood pressure, 20, 30 points on the score when people go from sitting to standing or from lying to sitting. And when you have that type of a drop, it's called orthostatic hypotension. And if we think it's neurological, meaning it's not because of a heart issue or a cardiac issue, we call it neurogenic or neurological orthostatic hypotension. So that's what it is. It can come with Parkinson's disease. It can come with, it's the predominant symptom in multiple systems atrophy, which is a Parkinson's plus condition, but it can happen in any Parkinsonism as well as a whole bunch of other neurological conditions. It's basically diagnosed by checking your blood pressure, laying, sitting, and standing. And generally, again, going from laying to sitting to standing, it should stay relatively the same. And if you're dropping by more than 20 points, you get diagnosed with orthostatic hypotension. The problem with it is it causes a whole bunch of symptoms. So one of the things they asked is, can it cause headaches? Well, yeah, it can cause headaches. It definitely causes lightheadedness. It can make your balance off. It can make you fall. It can make you pass out. And it's a big problem in a lot of patients because, again, those are not good things to have, especially the lightheadedness. Dizziness is a very common complaint. And passing out or syncopal episodes are really bad because that's how you get hurt. That's how you end up in the hospital. Again, staying off the ground is key to success. And so it is a big deal, and it's not as infrequent as you'd think. One of the problems is with Parkinson's disease, your blood pressure goes down. And the other problem is the medicines we use, so the carbidopa levodopas, the pramipexols, the ropinirolls, they also make your blood pressure go lower. And so a lot of my patients who start off maybe having high blood pressure and are on lisinopril or amlodipine or some metoprolol end up not only coming off of those medicines, but potentially even needing medicines to boost their blood pressure. It's not uncommon for patients with Parkinsonism or Parkinson's disease to have low blood pressure or blood pressure that goes down. And there are things we can do about it. Generally we start simple. I say, make sure you're drinking enough fluid, which nobody on this call is drinking enough water. And yes, I recognize that then you have to pee all the time. And yes, I recognize that you can't move fast enough to get to the bathroom. And so you don't want to drink enough water, particularly late in the evening. I hear these things all the time from everybody. And so I recognize that you're not drinking enough water for a variety of reasons, but you should, or you have to, particularly if you have blood pressure fluctuations. And you actually have to also eat more salt, which your whole life, your cardiologist or your primary care doctor has been telling you that salt's the devil. It's going to cause you to have heart attacks. You're going to have problems. And then you come to my office and I say, well, you need to eat more salt. So in order to hold on to the fluid, the water, the liquid that you're drinking, you have to have salt in your system to do that. And so you really need a combination of more salt and more fluid intake to boost your blood pressure. The other thing I tell all of my patients is you have to be careful when you stand up. So there's no more just jumping out of bed and getting going or getting up out of the chair and running down the hall. You got to take your time. You got to stand up, make sure you're not getting lightheaded or dizzy, make sure you're feeling okay, and then get going. There are other things you can do. There's abdominal binders, there's compression stockings, and then there's medications. So there's a few medicines that we use to try to boost blood pressure. Midodrine is probably the one that I use the most, followed by fludrocortisone or Florinef, followed by droxidopa or Northera, followed occasionally by pyridostigmine or Mestinon. I mean, there are medicines that we use to try to boost blood pressure. But then you run the other risk, which is, since I'm giving you a medicine to boost your blood pressure, then sometimes it goes too high. And so then sometimes we play this fun game of boosting your blood pressure in the morning and lowering your blood pressure in the evening, or however it seems to work. And you can imagine how much fun this is or how easy this is. And I will tell you, it's not fun or easy. And so blood pressure fluctuations really are difficult things to manage, but they're important things to manage because they do tend to cause problems. The last question, or the last part of the question that was emailed to me, is what I thought was actually the most interesting, which is, again, there's a lot of people that work on blood pressure, right? You go to your primary care doctor and they work on your blood pressure. You go to your heart doctor and they work on your blood pressure. And now you're coming to me and I'm working on your blood pressure. And so who is the ultimate gatekeeper or the controller of the blood pressure? And that does not have an easy answer. I am not great at blood pressure. It's not my area of expertise, but I do it because it happens so frequently in a lot of my patients. Realistically, I would love to defer to a cardiologist who works on the cardiovascular system and blood pressure for a living. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. And so we really kind of play it by ear. If your primary care doctor, or if your cardiologist, or if your other doctors are doing a good job, nephrologists also work on blood pressure. If your other doctors are doing a good job of managing your blood pressure, great. If they're not, and I have to get involved, okay. Sometimes we're all involved and none of us are very good at it. It becomes very complicated at times. And so the short answer to that is really communication is key. And if you've ever tried to have doctors talk to each other, we don't do a very good job of that. And so ultimately, unfortunately, it really does come down to you to manage this for yourself, which sounds terrible, but I hope I'm not telling you something you weren't already aware of. Getting a doctor to pick up the phone and call another doctor usually requires Joe Biden's written law. And so it just doesn't happen very often. And so at the end of the day, to think that we're going to communicate very well and make sure everybody's on the same page and make sure we're doing all the right stuff, and I'm just being realistic with you guys, it's just not going to happen. Maybe that's just me, but I think it's probably not. And so at the end of the day, communication really is key, and a lot of that's driven by you. Any of us can theoretically be in charge or control your blood pressure, but oftentimes it really does take all of us to try to figure out how to make it so your blood pressure is not going too low, but also not going too high. And again, it is a big difficulty. And yes, it can cause lightheadedness no matter which way you move your head or anything. Now, interestingly enough, when you do get dizziness, and again, dizziness is a tough word. And so every time patients come to me with dizziness, I ask them to explain it, because dizziness means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But if you do get dizziness of any sort that's really motion induced, meaning turning your head induced, then in the inner ear apparatus is another area that can cause problems like that. And so it's at least worth thinking about or potentially looking into. But usually lightheadedness is more of a blood pressure problem or a blood flow problem. And that's what we talk about in orthostatic hypotension. Is there a predictable time course from time of diagnosis to disability, such as wheelchair dependency? Does it vary between young onset versus older? Now, I could just say no and move on, but I'm not going to, because that's not fun for anybody. The short answer is no. Nothing is predictable in Parkinson's disease. And realistically, it's because Parkinson's disease isn't a disease, it's a syndrome. And what I mean by that is every single one of you who are on this call, which is now up to about 50 some, have something different. No two people that I've ever met have exactly the same thing. And it's because we don't really know why people get Parkinson's disease. And I have a distinct feeling that Parkinson's disease is not just one thing. I think that because Parkinson's disease and Parkinsonism, as I just covered, are really diagnosed or named based purely on symptoms. Anything that adds up, or anything in your body, from genetic problems to physical problems to electrolyte problems, anything that adds up to those cardinal features gets called Parkinsonism and Parkinson's disease. And so you can imagine, again, your genetic field is ginormous. There's a whole bunch of different genetic abnormalities or mutations or variants with superimposed environmental triggers. You know, we know a few of them, but I'm sure there's a bunch more out there that tend to trigger Parkinson's symptoms, that no two people have the same genetic underlying adding up that leads to this, or same genetic factors that add up to lead to these symptoms. And so no two people actually have the same thing. Because of that, you can't really predict, right? You can't really compare yourself to other people. You can't really predict what's going to happen. Everybody does have an individual course. The same thing is true for medications. You know, there's a different time course for everybody, from the time of diagnosis to the time of medications to the time of problems with medications. I mean, there are some general ballparks, but I don't even feel like they're all that good, because I've seen so many people that don't fall into even those general ballparks. And so I don't like to say, yes, we expect within a year it's going to go from one side to the other side. We expect in 5 years you're going to have significant problems walking, motor fluctuations, or dyskinesias. We expect in 10 years that you're going to be walking with a cane or a walker. I mean, there are some things like that that are written about, but I just don't find them to be all that accurate or useful, because we're not able to look at you and say, you fit into this category. This is what's going to happen. Predicting things, not my area of expertise. I would venture even to go a little bit further and say the vast majority of my patients never become wheelchair dependent. Some do. Don't get me wrong. I have plenty of patients that are in a wheelchair, but I have a lot that never make it there. And this actually leads to another question that I'm asked all the time, which is, well, what stage am I in, right? Everybody wants to know what stage they're in. And then I stare, everybody asks, a lot of people ask when they come to my office, well, what stage do I have? And I say, well, why do you want to know? They say, well, I want to know what's going to happen. I say, well, it doesn't tell you that. And it comes back to all these same things. So there is a staging scale for Parkinson's disease, in case you weren't aware of. It's called the Hahn and Yahr scale, which was invented by two people, Hahn and Yahr. I want to say they were at Columbia. God, I might have made that part up. I want to say they were in New York. Maybe, I can't remember where they were from. But at the end of the day, these two doctors came up with a scoring system, or a scale, and it's a 1 to 5 scale. And here's why it's not all that useful for day-to-day practice. So generally it goes from 1, which is unilateral symptoms and no balance problems, to 2 with bilateral symptoms and no balance problems, to 3 with bilateral symptoms and balance problems, 4 bilateral symptoms and more severe balance problems, 5 bilateral symptoms and severe balance problems. That's the scale in a nutshell. Why it's not particularly useful, which gets back exactly to your question, is it's not a linear scale. The time it takes to go from 1 to 2 is not the same time it takes to go from 2 to 3. Most people live in 3, I would say, for the predominant or majority part of their Parkinson's disease course. And that's not going out on a limb. Most people have symptoms on both sides and a little bit of balance problems. And I would argue that most of my patients do not meet or reach 5, which would really be wheelchair dependency. But just because you're a 3 now doesn't tell me what's going to happen, or just because you're a 1 now doesn't tell me when you're going to be a 2, or if you're going to get to a 3 anytime soon. And so even though there is a scoring system or a scale, it's not particularly useful for day-to-day practice. What it is useful for is research. When you have 2 different groups of people, and let's say you're giving placebo to one group and medicine to another group, you want to make sure that the groups are relatively similar. And so that's when you would use scales like that. You would want to say, well, most of the people in both were a 3 or a 2. And so the 2 groups were fairly equivalent. That makes it so that you're doing a good research trial. And so coming back to your question, because it's not a linear course, and because everybody has somewhat of a different trajectory tendency, it's really hard to be predicting. I'm not entirely sure it varies between young onset and older onset. I will say that studied and written about, young onset people tend to have more dyskinesia. They tend to have more motor fluctuations, but they also tend to have more mild disease, at least from what I read. Older patients do tend to have more walking and balance problems than other, but that's not written in, neither of those are written in stone either. And so even though there are some differences between young onset Parkinson's disease and older onset Parkinson's disease, none of it's written in stone. And so I don't really think you can use it to judge or predict what's going to happen. Are there pathophysiologic reasons for day-to-day variability in stamina and well, yeah. And this is what I try to get people to understand, because I get this question all the time in the office. Patients come in and they say, man, I can have 2 or 3 days where I feel great. I don't know why. I can't predict it. There's no pattern to it. And then I'll have a day or two where I can't get out of bed. What's the difference? Why does that happen? And I look at them and say, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not God. I didn't make this stuff up. But at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is a whole bunch of different variables. And the way that I describe it is how you're feeling at any given time is really based on, let's use dopamine as the marker. Dopamine is one of the major problems in Parkinson's disease, but don't get me wrong, it is not the only problem in Parkinson's disease. There are other chemicals that are impacted in Parkinson's disease: serotonin, norepinephrine, epinephrine, you name it, a whole bunch of chemicals are involved. But let's use dopamine as the marker, because that's what we talk about the most. That's what most of the medicines are aimed at. That's what we generally think of as being the problem in Parkinson's disease. So let's use dopamine as kind of the surrogate marker of how you're feeling and doing at any given time. And let's say, if you're at a certain level of dopamine, you feel good. The problem is so many variables impact that level of dopamine. And I'm not just talking about your medicine, because medicine impacts your level of dopamine. Most of the medicines that I give you, or that we give you, or that we use, are related to increasing dopamine. Levodopa is the precursor to dopamine. The dopamine agonists activate the receptors. The MAO inhibitors like rasagiline, selegiline, sulfinamide, the COMT inhibitors, the entacapone, the opicapone, they keep dopamine around longer, right? So all the medicines that we use are really aimed at increasing dopamine. And so your medicine plays a big role in it, but it's not the only thing. Your mood plays a role in it. Your sleep plays a role in it. Your exercise plays a role in it. How you did yesterday plays a role in it. How well you slept last night. Did you overdo it yesterday? Did you overdo it today? Your mood. Are you anxious? Are you depressed? Are you, having issues? Having a lot of stress plays a role in it. And so all of these things play a role in what we'll call your dopamine level, or your marker of how you're doing. And you can imagine just how predictable it is at any given time, what's playing a role in what. It's not something we're able to judge, measure, or add up. And you're going to have good days and bad days. Every patient that I have has good times, bad times, good hours, bad hours, good minutes, bad minutes sometimes. And it's not always predictable. It does have to do with all of the chemicals and what level they're at and what's impacting them at any given time, and a whole bunch of variables that we can't measure all at one time. And all of those things play a role in how you feel. The problem is, as you've found out, that it's not predictable. There's not a good pattern to it. You're not able to figure out all the variables and what impacted what. What did you eat? What did you do? Where did you go? Who were you with? What was your mood? You just can't control all these things. And so I think that's the pathophysiological reason for why there is such variability. And yes, I wish there was a better way to measure these things, or gauge these things, or try to figure out how to add them up to make you do better. Because if we could figure out how to maximize your good times and minimize those bad times, well, that's exactly what we're trying to do. That's really the goal of everything we're trying to do in the clinic or in the office when you come see me, is how do we maximize those times where you feel good, where you feel on, where you feel upbeat, and how do we minimize those times where you feel terrible? They're going to happen. They always do, but how do we try to keep them to a minimum? We haven't quite figured out tests for these things or measurements for these things. Maybe someday we will, but I think that's kind of why you see that. Oh, you're new to this. Welcome to the party. Do you want to see a specialist? So there's how can I be sure Parkinson's disease is what I have? Well, that's $1 million question. There is no test for Parkinson's disease. So let me put this into a nutshell. Parkinson's disease is a diagnosis based on symptoms. So what you tell us, what we see, what we find when we go looking at you, poking you, feeling you, watching you walk, so on and so forth, all adds up to how we come to the idea of a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Now, a movement disorder specialist is not the only person who takes care of Parkinson's disease. Believe me, there's not enough of me to take care of everybody that has Parkinson's disease. If you think about the, I don't know, something around 10,000 people in the Pittsburgh area have Parkinson's disease. I can't take care of 10,000 people. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. You would have to clone me a couple of times over, or, quadruple us to really do that. And so primary care doctors take care of Parkinson's disease. General neurologists take care of Parkinson's disease. Movement disorder specialists take care of Parkinson's disease. Do you have to see a movement disorder specialist? No. It really comes down to a lot of things. One, it comes down to where are you, right? If you're in a big city, you have a much higher chance of finding a movement disorder specialist. If you live in the middle of nowhere, you don't have a great chance of finding a movement disorder specialist. It also comes down to your symptoms and how comfortable your doctors are with taking care of them. And so what often comes to my office is, sometimes I make new diagnoses of Parkinson's disease. It happens, but a lot of times people have been seeing their primary care doctor for a couple of years and they've been working on it, or they've been to a local neurologist and they've been working on it for a couple of years and they're not really sure what to do next. And then they come to my office. And so there's no right answer to that question. A movement disorder specialist is really a neurologist who spends an extra year or two specifically, called a fellowship, specifically taking care of or learning about movement disorders, i.e. Parkinson's disease, tremors, Huntington's disease, dystonia, things like that. And so we do have a little bit of more expertise. And I think the one thing that kind of sets me apart from general neurologists in the area, not that they don't do a good job, most of the patients that I've gotten from them have been well managed, is that general neurologists take care of everything, right? They take care of Parkinson's disease, but they also take care of epilepsy. They take care of multiple sclerosis. They take care of ALS. They take care of migraines. I would say 95% of my day is spent taking care of movement disorders. So probably at least 75% of my day is Parkinson's disease, all day, every day. And I do think that gives me a little bit of an advantage just in terms of experience. But realistically, any of those people can take care of Parkinson's disease. And you don't necessarily need a movement disorder specialist, and you're more than welcome to find one, or you can keep doing what you're doing and maybe they eventually get you to one or not. It really is subjective and up to you. The good part about, your healthcare, or in today's day and age, is you are in charge of it. You ultimately get the final say with who you go to, who you don't go to, who you want to go to. Now, if you want to see a movement disorder specialist, you'll probably have to wait. We're not easy to find. It takes forever to get into us. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. It's not a great time for healthcare, in all honesty, in terms of access and having enough people. But, again, that's completely up to you and whatever decision you want to make. If you do progress or if you start having problems, then I do think a movement disorder specialist probably makes more sense, particularly if you're starting to think about deep brain stimulator surgery or other more invasive things. But again, it's all very, very subjective. There are no hard, fast rules. Nothing is written in stone. It's really up to your discretion. I have mild to moderate Parkinson's disease. I have tremors and some telltale signs. My big problem is balance. If I stand a long time and walk smaller steps, or I'm on the stairs, I feel like I'm about to fall. Constant fear of falling. There's a lot there. And all of these are not only common issues, but tough issues. The problem with balance in Parkinson's disease is a bunchfold. So one is it's common. Two is it's the most dangerous problem that you deal with. And three is it's one we're not all that good at fixing. So balance and falling is the most dangerous problem. So I actually thought that infection was the number one reason that Parkinson's disease patients end up in the hospital, and falls were number two. But I actually just gave a talk on exercise 2 weeks ago, and I did a little bit of looking, and there was a study that actually suggested falls was number one. And so falling is a big reason that people end up in the hospital, injured, problems, everything that comes along with being in the hospital, which is a terrible place for you guys to be if you haven't been there recently. You want to stay out of the hospital. Balance is such a dangerous problem that we talk about it all the time. But it is hard to work on. It's one of those symptoms that does not respond as well to the dopamine medicines. Levodopa works really well for tremors, really well for stiffness, somewhat for slowness of movement, and less so for walking and balance. Deep brain stimulator also works a little bit for, walking and balance, but not nearly as well as for tremors and stiffness and the other symptoms. And so even though we know that walking imbalance is such a dangerous problem, it's such an important problem, it's a really hard problem to fix. It doesn't, none of us in my field or in your guys' situation are happy with the success that we have from walking imbalance. There are some medicines that we use. I'll use more amantadine to try to work on walking imbalance. I'll use Exelon, which is a dementia medicine, and Alzheimer's disease medicine. I'll use Aricept. And it turns out that in some studies, it turns out that acetylcholine is actually more the chemical involved in balance than dopamine, which is why I'll use some of those medicines, because acetylcholine is the chemical thought to be a problem in Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes I'll use stimulants, so modafinil or methylphenidate or atomoxetine have been thought of in walking imbalance. But the short answer is none of these medicines have ever really proven to have benefit in walking imbalance. We try them because they're still the best we have, even though none of them are all that good. It's just one of those symptoms that doesn't respond as well to medicines as we would like. Same thing is true for surgery. Balance is actually something that makes me pause and cause for concern if I'm sending somebody for deep brain stimulator surgery, because sometimes it's made worse. And so, yes, we all recognize that this is a tremendously dangerous problem and a very important problem. And we all wish there was something better that I had to offer you for walking in balance, but it just doesn't exist. The only thing that's ever really been proven to help walking in balance is my favorite thing, which I gave a talk on, which is exercise. And this is why I spend so much time talking about exercise, sending people to physical therapy to specifically work on walking in balance. Use a cane or a walker if you need to, because it is such a dangerous and big problem. Again, and then what ends up happening is, as you alluded to, is once you fall, what happens? Well, now you have a fear of falling, right? And so after you fall, or even before you fall, that fear of falling can become paralyzing. People are then afraid to get up and walk or go out because they're afraid they're going to fall. Getting off the ground is a big challenge. So once you're on the ground, getting up is really hard, if not impossible. And so it becomes this vicious cycle. You either fall or you have near falls, which lead to a fear of falling, which lead to you not getting up or getting out and doing much, which makes you weaker, which makes your walking worse, which makes you more likely to fall. Again, another thing I'm not all that good at fixing. That fear of falling is really hard thing to get past. It's not something that, I just give you an anxiety medicine and you feel better about it. It doesn't work that way. The only thing in my experience that's ever gotten people past that fear of falling is walking and not falling. Which again is really hard to do. But this is why I spend, again, a large part of my time talking about exercise, asking about falls, asking about balance, working with physical therapy and a physical therapist, exercise classes, because it's such an important symptom and a dangerous symptom. Falling is not your friend. I repeat that to every patient that I see. It is a big and dangerous issue. And so again, yeah, we try a bunch of different medicines. We try more dopamine medicines, all the other stuff that I mentioned, with some success, minimal success. But the key really is just trying to stay upright, doing as much exercise and therapy as you can, using assisted devices if you need to, and just being very careful. I wish I had a better answer for you than that, but I just don't. Are there medicines that can help with posture and slow movement? Yes and no. So coming back to balance, posture and balance go hand in hand. And so what I see all the time is everybody's posture gets worse. So everybody's flexed forward, head's a little bit down, posture is bad. And you'll know this because your significant other will constantly say, hey, stand up straight. I hear that all the time too. And so at the end of the day, sometimes that responds to more medicine. So sometimes if we increase levodopa, if we add in a dopamine agonist, we add in something else, it can help with posture and slow movement. Again, if it's more balance, it's a little bit more difficult. If it's structural, it's a little bit more difficult. And what I mean by structural is a lot of my patients, because they're flexed forward or because their posture isn't so good, they develop neck problems. So they have cervical spine problems, they have low back problems, They have hips and knee problems. A lot of joints take a beating when your posture and your walking mechanics are not correct. And if you have Parkinson's disease, your walking mechanics are not correct. You don't come down on the correct part of your foot. You come down on the front. It hits pretty hard. You take short shuffling steps. Again, your posture is not good. None of that is what your body was designed or how your body was designed to walk. And so when you don't have proper walking mechanics, it puts tremendous amount of stress and strain on joints, including knees, hips, backs, necks, and shoulders. And so a lot of my patients have bad all of the above. And so if it's a structural problem, meaning you have compression fractures or you have a lot of arthritic changes in your neck or back that's making you bend forward, or it's a hip or knee problem, medicine really doesn't fix that all that well. The only thing you can do is either correct the problem surgically, physical therapy, exercise, stretching, which I harp on all the time. Those are more likely to help posture than anything. Again, sometimes, and if you do find that it kind of fluctuates with your medicine, well, then more medicine might help with that. And so again, one thing I always like to talk about, or I like to press upon you guys, is that when you're thinking about the problems that you have, from tremors to stiffness to walking problems to anxiety and depression to sleep problems to urinary problems to bowel problems, all of the things that come along with Parkinson's disease, it's helpful to not just bring them up. It's also helpful if you have some idea if they respond to medicine or not. One of the easiest and first ways to try to help any of these things is to kind of maximize your medicine. And so if you find that any of these symptoms are wearing off problems, and I'll get back to off and on in a second, because that's always a question too. But if you find that any of these things are wearing off problems, then that makes somebody like me think, maybe you need a little bit more medicine. Let's adjust up. Let's add in something to try to prevent these ups and downs. And let's see if we can smooth out your medicines and see if we can get you doing better. Or vice versa. If you find that, no matter, this is constant, my posture's flexed forward and it doesn't respond to my medicine, nothing changes. Well, then maybe we look to more a structural problem and we really get you to physical therapy. We work on stretching, extensor movements, things like that. Now, one question that we always ask is about on-off phenomenon. And just real briefly, what we usually think about that is not everybody notices on-off phenomenon or kicking on and wearing off. And so at the end of the day, if you're not somebody who notices these fluctuations, that's okay. Some people do. And what we mean by on and off are when you take your medicines, it works, you feel good, you're less stiff, you're less slow, you're less shaky. That's on. As your pill wears off, or as you're almost due or potentially due for your next pill, your tremor comes back, you're stiffer, you're slower, you're not feeling very good, that's off. So when you hear us talk about on and off or wearing off, that's what we're talking about. And so in coming back to something like that, if you do find that when your pills wear off, you're flexed forward and you're slow, it may just mean you need more medicine. If you find that it doesn't fluctuate or on off or things like that, then maybe it's something different and we need to look a little bit further. Do I suggest V8 for orthostatic hypotension? It's not a bad choice. Again, that's a good way to get not just electrolytes and salt, but fluid at the same time. And so again, really anything like that are good to try. Gatorade, Powerade, Pedialyte, V8, anything that has electrolytes in it or salt in it, anything that has fluid in it. You hesitate to say a Bloody Mary, although you got to be careful with the alcohol. But at the end of the day, you get the idea. I wouldn't expect that to fix it. And so I think it's a good place to start. And if you have mild orthostatic hypotension, it's definitely worth a try. But at the end of the day, in addition to that, we're still probably going to have to do more. I can't think of anybody that I've seen who came to me with significant orthostatic hypotension that they started drinking Gatorade or V8 and all of a sudden they were fixed. It's not a bad choice, and I think it's reasonable, but again, and if you have mild symptoms, it might help, but probably there's going to be more to it. Have I heard that curcumin or threocurmin may have a robust therapeutic effect on Parkinson's disease symptoms? I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to hedge my bets on that one. I have heard that curcumin is good for Parkinson's disease. Have I heard that it has a robust therapeutic effect? No. And so how I interpret that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that a robust therapeutic effect would be that symptoms are significantly improved. I've never seen that. However, is it helpful? Yeah, it probably is. So curcumin is a good antioxidant. It's a good free radical scavenger. It's been used in, I want to say, Indian medicine, Ayurvedic medicine for a long time. I'm not an expert on that by any means. I may be making that up. It's possible. I don't think so, though. But at the end of the day, it's been around for a long time, and it's been used medicinally for a long time because it does have significant properties that theoretically help prevent neurodegeneration. That's not proven. No, I don't think anybody's going to do a well-designed, gold standard, double-blinded, placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trial on turmeric. I doubt. Be great if they did, or any other supplement or over-the-counter thing. There's no money in it, and unfortunately, this is a big business. And so at the end of the day, I don't think we're going to ever have the direct great evidence to suggest that, yeah, this is really a great idea. Is there some science to back it up? Yeah, I think so. Does it make sense? Yeah, I think so. Have there been some non-blinded or non-controlled studies on it? I think so, that seemingly look positive. And so do I think it's helpful? Maybe. Do I think it's going to hurt you? Probably not. Do I think it's going to, I don't know how expensive it is, but as long as it's not putting you in the poorhouse, if you want to try it, be my guest. But to say that it has a robust therapeutic effect, I think would be a little bit of a stretch. That's my opinion on that. What is the difference between dystonia and Parkinson's disease dystonia? That actually has a really hard answer. The short answer is nothing, but that's a cop-out answer. Let me explain that a little bit better. Dystonia is not really a diagnosis. And this is what I teach my medical students and my residents, is that I almost never, the things that I take care of are not actually diagnoses. So things like tremors, dystonia, chorea, athetosis, dyskinesia, these are not diagnoses. They are purely descriptions of movements. And so dystonia means abnormal muscle firing, abnormal muscle contracting, leading to fixed and twisting postures. That's it, plain and simple. So it's not really a diagnosis. It's really a description of what we're seeing. And that's the problem with the word dystonia. Dystonia doesn't tell you anything else. It doesn't tell you the underlying cause. It doesn't tell you what kind of dystonia, what it is. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of dystonia, ranging from genetics that happen in kids to cervical dystonia, which is the most common adult or acquired form of dystonia that I take care of, to dystonia that comes with Parkinson's disease, which is usually either toe curling, foot turning in, hand cramping, things like that. Those are dystonic postures or dystonia in Parkinson's disease. The short answer is there's nothing different about them because it's really just a description of what we're seeing or the movement. But that's stupid. There is a difference. I take care of non-Parkinson's disease dystonia. And again, usually it's writer's cramp, focal dystonia, cervical dystonia, blepharospasm, things like that. And they all have treatments. I use medicines, I use Botox injections, so on and so forth. The difference in Parkinson's disease, in my experience, is even though it's the same thing, it's muscle contracting. So it's abnormal muscle contracting leading to fixed and twisting postures. It's usually more a medication thing, and not always, don't get me wrong, not always, but usually. It's usually a wearing off dystonia, or it's sometimes a peak dystonia. So when your pills absolutely hit their peak, sometimes things contract, but more often it's a wearing off. So when pills wear off, toes curl, foot turns in, hand claws up, things like that. And why that's different is usually we adjust the medicines. Now, I do Botox injections or botulinum toxin injections because Botox isn't the only one. Botox is a brand name for those of you not aware. And I do Botox or botulinum toxin injections for Parkinson's disease patients too. And so the treatments aren't necessarily always different, but oftentimes in Parkinson's disease, you try to adjust your medicines to see if it'll help first before we get to the other things that I usually do for, say, typical dystonia or non-Parkinson's disease related dystonia. So that's kind of the more lengthy answer for that question. Trekking poles or sticks are way better than a cane at managing balance issues. A bit cumbersome, but better. I don't disagree with that. I have a lot of patients that use poles. I have a lot of patients that use canes too. And so I don't know if one is necessarily better than another, but what that does bring up is an important thing, which is everybody's different. Everybody's different. I have some people that love using a cane. It works really well. I have some people that trip over a cane and absolutely can't, or it makes them fall. I have some people that use a walker, a rollator, and it works great. I have some people that just can't get it to work, and it ends up causing them more problems. I have some patients that use trekking poles, 1 pole, 2 poles, a walking stick, and they love it. They go marching through the woods and they go on hikes and so on and so forth. And then I have some people that the poles just don't work. They don't like the way they feel, or they affect their walking, and they just can't use them. And so I do think poles are a good idea, or sticks. And a lot of people do find them better than canes. Some people like to use both of them, kind of like your skiing or ski poles. And that does tend to help with balance. Are they way better? I don't know. It probably comes down to user preference, but the short answer is find something that works for you. Everybody is different. And just because your friend at the exercise class that is using a trekking pole thinks it's the best thing ever, if it doesn't work for you, it's not a great idea. If a cane works better for you, then use a dang cane. If you absolutely need a walker because a cane didn't work and poles weren't enough, then use a walker. The short answer is you have to figure out what works best for you, and you really have to use whatever keeps you upright. Again, a lot of people come to my office and they say, well, do you think I need to use a cane, or do you think I need to use a walker? And I say, I don't care what you use. You're not allowed to fall. If you need a cane to not fall, if you need a walker to not fall, then yeah, you need it. If you can walk around and you do fine and you don't fall, then no, you can get away without it. I don't really care how you accomplish the task. You have to stay off the ground. If you're somebody that thinks poles are great, use poles. If you hate poles, you want a cane, use a cane. I don't really care what you use. Figure out what works the best for you. Have I heard of unsinking the brain to help Parkinson's patients? Vibrotactile coordinated reset stimulation. That is a very big mouthful of very long and hard to understand words. Unsinking vibrotactile coordinated I assume just their short answer is no. I'm guessing on this one. I wonder if you're talking about something like the Q, which is this vibrating thing that kind of people put on their chest. It's available in Europe that hasn't gotten here yet, even though people have been asking it for a long time, or something like that, that kind of, or even if you think about, there are some things that I've seen that people wear for posture that as soon as your posture slumps, it kind of gives you a little shock or a jolt or a vibration. I'm wondering if you're referring to some things like that. I don't know that I've seen them necessarily studied in Parkinson's disease, but we do know that cueing works really well in Parkinson's disease. And so this sounds like another way to cue. And so what is cueing is the obvious next question. Well, so a lot of people, when they get stuck or they're frozen or they have hesitation, they use a cue. And so for various people, it's various things. Some people count 1, 2, 1, 2, left, right. They talk to their feet. Some people put a laser line in front of them. This is where, I forget the name of that device is, that can attach to your cane or walker and can put a laser on the ground. You can step over it. There's 1,000 different ways you can cue. A metronome has been looked at. Music has been looked at. I'm sure. And so this cue thing, thank you, Casey. Next ride. I always forget these things. So the cue is something that was available in England, which was a thing that vibrates you. And that, again, is another way to cue you or coordinated reset you so that you can get going again. There's a lot of evidence in Parkinson's disease that cueing actually really does work. And everybody comes up with their own thing. Physical therapists can work with you on this, particularly in freezing of gait. So again, freezing of gait is exactly what it sounds like. You start walking and then you get stuck, or when you stand up, you can't get going. And it's a real big problem. It leads to falls, it leads to loss of balance. And one of the things that we specifically focus on is cueing. And so I can't say that I know specifically if that's what you're talking about with this vibrotactile coordinated reset stimulation, but I assume it's something along those lines. And the short answer is yes, it probably does have some benefit in Parkinson's disease. I don't know that I've seen any major studies on it or anything like that, but it's probably not a bad idea. And that's the last question. So again, you can throw more questions, but I actually wanted to end with one thing from last time. So don't throw any more questions because this will take me 5 minutes till the end. So last time, I think it was last time, somebody asked me about, see, I looked up his name before I got on here and now I'm blanking on his name. darn it. The guy who cured himself from Parkinson's disease. Hold on. I got it here because I just looked this up.
Harold Shifke.
Howard Shifke. Thank you.
Harold.
Howard. I'm looking at it right now.
Harold.
It's Howard. I have his book up in front of me. It's Howard Shifke. Anyway, so Howard Shifke cured himself of Parkinson's disease. And at first blush, I thought, well, that's ridiculous. Again, I'm a doctor. You know how doctors think. We are not the most open-minded individuals. I know this is shocking information. But so what I did, but knowing that I don't know everything and knowing that this is a condition that I also can't fix, I felt it was worth my time to go look and see what he was doing. And so interestingly enough, he actually outlined, he has a blog that's freely available on the internet. I actually went through a lot. There's years of weekly or sometimes a couple of times per week blog from him on his Parkinson's disease quest. And his goal was to cure Parkinson's disease. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, not by me. I've never seen this guy. I don't know this guy. He's not my patient. And much like everybody, much like I do, and much like all of you guys do, they went to the doctor. You come to see me. I tell you, this is what I think you have. I can't fix it. There's no cure. There's no disease modifying medications. Here's your carbidopa, levodopa. Let's see if we can work on you symptomatically, right? Because that's what I tell everybody that I see. This is what we do in Parkinson's disease management. This is really the best we can do. He was not happy with that. Much like I don't think anybody's all that happy with that. I'm not happy about giving you that advice. But that's what, at the end of the day, that's what we do. He then took it upon himself that says, that's not good enough. I'm not going to take any of these medicines, and I'm going to find a way to cure myself of Parkinson's disease. And he did this through Qigong, which is, I don't even know the best way to describe it, a series of pattern movements. And he outlines exactly what he did. He changed his diet very dramatically. He went vegan and ended up changing a whole lot of things in his diet. And it took him, according to his blog, almost 2 years of doing this regularly, repeatedly, every day. Pretty much every hour or minute was spent on his health and well-being, trying to cure himself of Parkinson's disease. And then, again, according to his blog, he did. It took a while and it took consistency, and he felt terrible doing it. But at least according to what he wrote, he went back to his neurologist. He had no symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and he has thus dubbed himself cured of Parkinson's disease. Now, again, when I read through this, it's incredible. It's hard to believe, right? Just based on kind of what I know about how the brain works, what I know about neurodegeneration, what I'm used to seeing in a day-to-day practice, day-to-day life, it seems outrageous and it's really hard to believe. But at the end of the day, I can't argue with what he writes because, again, I don't know him. I can't say, no, you didn't. That's just silly. But this was a question that I got last time. And so it's just fascinating to read through his information. I haven't had a chance to pick up his book yet, although I do intend to, because I'm always looking for, I'm glad you got it. I don't have it yet, but eventually I will get it. I'm always interested in what else can we do to better take care of this disease. Believe me, if everybody could go do what he did and cure themselves of Parkinson's disease, I'm all for it. I don't have a problem thinking outside the box or trying to help people with ways that seemingly would go against what you think a doctor would normally tell you. I recognize my limitations, and I know this is a condition that I personally cannot fix. Modern medicine has not come up with a fix for this yet. We're working on it, and theoretically we'll get there at some point, but we are not there. And so if you have other ideas, it's silly for me to say, no, don't do that, when I don't have a better solution. And so again, I felt that because I went and read about this stuff and I looked at what he did and I read through a lot of his blog and a lot of his videos and I saw what he did. And again, I still can't explain it. I don't think that I have a good explanation for how these things would have cured his Parkinson's disease. But I also can't argue with his results. And so he's been theoretically cured for Parkinson's disease for a whole bunch of years now, and continues to do well. And interestingly enough, he doesn't even have to continue to do the things that he was doing to cure himself of Parkinson's disease to keep it from coming back. Again, take that for what you will. I'm not sure how to interpret that, how to explain that. Physiologically, I can't explain any of that. But at the same time, he's not my patient. I've never examined him. I can only take his word for it. And so again, I'll leave it up to you guys to read the book, read his blog, see what you think. And again, if you want to try it, it does not seem easy. Do not get me wrong. Nothing that he did sounded, he even comes out straightforward, tells every single person this. Nothing that I did was easy. It is a long process. You will be miserable and you will want to give up. That's pretty much what he writes in every one of his blogs that I read. But again, it was very interesting to me to read. And again, I think it's something, at least thinking about it. And the way that I use these things is I'm always trying to figure out what else can I incorporate into my medical practice to try to help people do better. Again, I don't think I can cure the disease, but maybe I can pick and choose some of the things that he did or was using to try to help people. And that was kind of my thoughts on that. But since it was asked last time, and I did go back and look into it and read a little bit about this, I felt like I should bring that up to you guys and kind of circle back to answer that question. And with that, I am now out of time, so I'll pass it back to Casey. And again, you guys keep the questions coming. We'll keep doing this. Next time we'll be at normal time. This was kind of a one-time event that I had to move it a little bit earlier because I got to run out of here and get to my next talk. But keep on coming back and I'll keep answering them.
Thank you, Dr. Leichliter, and thanks everyone for coming. And if you joined late, this will be posted on our YouTube channel, which you can access on our website. So we'll see you next month and be well. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.